This is a timeline of my grandfather and Richard Wetherill. The timeline of Richard Wetherill and great-grandfather Rafael Mescalito. Now, Richard Wetherill was born in 1858. He died in 1910. In 1888, he was 30 years old, and him and his family had gone to Mesa Verde to, there was word about all the things that they were finding there, and so they started on that whole renovation, taking antiquities, selling them, and making money, etc., etc. Then in 1906, he was 48 years old. That's when he didn't want to do the archaeology anymore. Probably because of the flack that he was getting from museums. People weren't trusting him. I don't know if he was keeping it. I have no idea. That's a horrible thing to say. But they didn't think that they could really trust him, and there was all kinds of bad words about him, and the Navajos were not happy with him, the Dene people. So there was friction in the air, and I think to subside it, he decided, well, I'm going to quit archaeology. Then in 1910, he was 52 years old, and one of the Navajo men, he did shoot and kill him, not far from where he lived, by Pueblo Bonito. Then my great-grandpa, Rafael Mescalito, he is my Nali as well. He was born in 1868. He died in 1945. In 1888, kind of the same timeline here, my grandfather, Raphael, my Nali, was 20 years old, and he met Richard Wetherill because he was farming. My grandfather was farming in GGpa. It used to be the old wagon road to come in, and so I think everybody came that direction. And he must have been farming when Richard Wetherill came with the men, and he had an interpreters, and he talked with my great-grandfather and explained to him what he was doing. And my great-grandfather said, yes, I understand, I know you've been in Mesa Verde. So my great-grandfather spoke with him and struck a conversation up and asking him about Chaco Canyon. So then you go further, in 1906, and when Richard Wetherill had quit archaeology, in 1906, between 1888 and 1906, Richard Wetherill had been, conversing and going through Chaco Canyon with my grandfather, Raphael. So in 1906, when Richard decided to quit archaeology, he met with Mr. Wetherill, showing him Chaco Canyon and the Navajo Dene architecture, the technology, the basket weaving, pottery, history, and Raphael being a builder like his Dene ancestors in Chaco Canyon, he showed him that these were his people, the Dene. Then in 1910, when Richard Wetherill was killed, my grandfather, Raphael, was 42 years old. Then in 1920, my grandfather, Raphael, my Nali, was 52 years old, and he was down on the left side in GGpa and moved up to Chakra Mesa, the big mesa. And In 1933, Rafael Mescalito, my grandfather, was 65 years old, and President Roosevelt created a program, a government program, funded program, called the Civilian Conservation Corps. And he selected my grandfather, Raphael, because he was really well renowned in that area. And he headed and selected the renovation crew. And it was called the Indian Subdivision in Chaco Canyon. In 1945, my grandfather, Raphael, was 77 years old, and he died, and he was buried in Ohincino, and a juniper tree was used as his headstone. It was so beautiful. We saw that place, and it was lovely. Then you move the timeline forward. My grandfather, Mescalito Nelson, this is him. This is all in concert with each other. Grandpa Shi Nali Hosteen, Mescalito Nelson, was born in 1891 and died in 1976. In 1901, he was 10 years old. Rafael Mescalito, his father, took Mescalito to Cabazon Peak. He took him to Cabazon Peak to pass down his oral history. There's a GGpa at the top of Cabazon Peak. That's where our previous paternal generations, they climbed up the peak, and that's where up there in the GGpa, that's where they passed their generational oral history from father to son, all the way to like Raphael did with Mescalito, my grandfather. So then in 1910, he was 19 years old. Mescalito, my grandfather, was 19 years old, and he helped his father to do some renovating in Chaco on Pueblo Bonito. Now in 1914, he was 23 years old. He enlisted in World War I, and that was the time that he was living in Chaco Mesa, okay? Then in 1920, he was 29 years old, and he became a mounted policeman. I put mounted. He was a mounted police. And then in 1933, he was 42 years old. 1945, he was 54 years old when his father passed away, Rafael Mescalito. He died. And so my grandfather, Mescalito, when I talk about him walking on water, I literally mean how my paternal line was just incredible. And this is how I describe my grandfather, Mescalito. He was a chapter president. He was a Navajo Nation councilman. He worked as a mounted policeman. He had thousands of horses. He had cattle, sheep. He was a builder himself through his father, Rafael Mescalito. And he was a great leader. He was a medicine man. He got an honorable discharge from World War I, and he was a sheep herder. He was a rancher. He was an excellent teacher, and he was prayerful. He was kind. He was humble. He was very spiritual. He was knowledgeable. He suffered much, but his loss became his strength. He testified of the holy ones. He testified that there is a God, Jesus Christ, and the holy ones, and that Jesus appeared to his ancestors in Chaco Canyon, and he knew Chaco Canyon's true history. What you know and read created by the BIA, the traders, the ranchers, all white people who never lived in Chaco Canyon. most of that has been false. When you come to Chaco Canyon, there's a road that comes from the east, and you come this way. The first place on the right is called the Gallo Campground, and right there across there, there's a bridge here, and then there's a sign that says the trail, the GGpa Trail. Now I don't know what GGpa means, but this is where you go. You go around. This is a mesa. You go around the mesa, and then there's a trail, and it leads to GGpa. That's where Raphael was, you know, and remember, here is the mesa, and you have the mesa, and the waters that were coming down were watering his farm. Because here in the arroyo, this is the arroyo, used to be the river, upstream, guess what? The ranchers, the people, all decided to divert the water to serve them, not to serve the Navajo people. And the Cattlemen's Association, I can't stand them. They're a part of this. So they diverted, and this is all dry. So this is where my Rafael Mescalito lived. He farmed there. This is where, now this is the new road. There's a wagon road that came across here, and we used to come on that road to Pueblo Pintado. And that road came, and that's where Wetherill came on there and met my grandfather here. And then, they, you know, the story, and that's after that. The rest is history. Then, across from GGpa, this is a mesa, whether you guys know it or not. This is Chaco Mesa. It's on the south of GGpa, and this is where they moved. Grandpa, Rafael Mescalito, and my grandfather Mescalito Nelson. They all moved here. So I'm going to show you kind of, I don't know if you can see this. I'll see you in the next video. Hagone. I love you again. Ayo anoshne. Hagone. Now everybody's guessing, and everybody's saying, oh, Chaco Canyon, it's a Chacoan thing. And it was definitely Pueblo. You know what? That's a bunch of hogwash, because that was created by the Dene people. And I will explain that to you. The name and why. There is many complications, aesthetics. It's amazing how when you want to give something exposure, and the white people want to do that, they like to pick something that's more glamorous. It's just like the models. If you're fat and ugly, are you going to be standing around in a bathing suit? No. They want the skinny Barbie with, you know, that's anorexic and looks really beautiful, got big eyes because she's malnutritioned, and she looks fine as wine to them. And she's the one that wears all these costumes, and with that we purchase, all of us, I'm guilty of it, and so that we can look like Barbie. Hello. So there's many aspects of this, and that same thing happened in Chaco Canyon. And I will go into that a little in more detail, because again, I think I've already said it. You know, they looked upon the Dene people as loathsome. They were forlorn. When I tell you the history, you'll know why they became more nomadic and what happened.